Welcome to another episode of Search News You Can Use with me, Dr. Marie Haynes. This episode is being recorded on Wednesday, January 15th of 2020, and boy, we have a lot of stuff to talk about this week. As you probably know by now, Google has announced another core algorithm update. They want us to call it the January 2020 core update. Not the most exciting name, but it explains clearly when it was released and that it's a core update. And so we've got some early data. I'm going to share some of that with you in this podcast, but it's really early. So a lot of what I'm going to say today is speculation, but I'll share with you what we're seeing in sites that have been seeing improvements. I have loads of tips to discuss with you as well. We're going to talk about a very interesting Disavow case study. We're going to talk about some new features for Google Travel that I think could affect travel websites that are there. A really interesting link building idea in a way that you can build links. Maybe not build is probably not the right word here, but a way that you can get links at scale if you can do it right. So we'll talk about that as well. And we have a really good question in the Q&A section about a website that has old reciprocal links from mommy bloggers, and they're wanting to know whether they should be disavowing these. So I'm going to give you my thoughts on that. Let's get right into this because there's an awful lot for me to discuss, and I'm going to try to not be too wordy this week. We're getting longer and longer with podcast, and so my goal is to share with you the stuff that you're going to find interesting and that hopefully you can use to help improve your website. I thought it was hilarious today that I woke up to reading my tweets and saw this tweet from Danny Sullivan, not at me. I'm not involved in this at all, but Danny Sullivan was trying to help out somebody who was having issues with a Google My Business issue, and so tweeted, Google My Business might be able to help, and Google My Business tweeted back, "Hi Danny, we've reached out to you via DM. We're happy to assist you there." Oh, I think that's hilarious, and it's one of my top liked tweets so far of this year that everybody else thinks it's hilarious that I guess when you automate, is this really automated or who knows? I think social media is one of those areas that you have to be super careful because if you mess up, people are going to laugh at you all over the place. So hopefully you got a good laugh from that. I thought it was a fun way to start the day. Probably not for the person on GMB support that replied to Danny that way. But anyhow, let's move on. I know you want to hear about this algorithm update. So the first thing we know is that it is a core update, and we know that Google puts out updates multiple times per day, but then a few times a year they do this core update. The last update that they called a core update, I believe, was in September of last year, so it's been a few months. We did also have the November 8th update, which I think if Google had not told us that they were, actually pre-announcing core update releases, we probably would have called that some type of a significant update by Google. This was an unannounced one, November 8th, and I've talked about it ad nauseum. If you want to get more on this, we have a blog post. If you just Google November 8th Google update, you should see us near the top of the results there. And that, we think was mostly about links. Today's update, or the update that released this week, I should say as I'm recording this, it's January 15th, and the update was announced January 13th. Now, as of January 13th, we had a couple of clients that were starting to see some increases, but nothing that we would get super excited about. And when we see an update at this time of year, it's often really hard to know whether it's traffic is improving because of the update or maybe it's a seasonal improvement. And so that makes things kind of tricky because a lot of websites see improvements in traffic every January. And so, when Google announced it on January 13th, we didn't see a whole lot going on that day. And even later in the afternoon on the 14th, I wasn't completely convinced that very much was going on. And then once we had a full day's worth of data from the 14th, it's really clear that this is a significant update. So in our newsletter, this is episode number 115 of Search News You Can Use that you can find online. We've outlined, I've actually given you some screenshots from some clients that have allowed us to share anonymized data from them showing that some of our clients are seeing improvements. We will have way more information in another week and also a week after that. I'm finding it's taking us a good 2 to 3 weeks to fully analyze what we think Google is doing with an update. But very, very, very early thoughts. First of all, a good number of the sites that are clients of ours that saw improvements are health sites. These are health sites that some of them saw drops with the June 3rd update. If you recall, the June 3rd update we really felt had a lot to do with Google's attempt to make it so that websites that are talking on alternative medical topics that maybe are not in line with what a traditional physician would recommend could see some drops in rankings. And we saw that authoritative, trustworthy websites like Harvard, WebMD, Mayo Clinic, they saw big increases, whereas some of the less authoritative websites, especially if you're talking on alternative medical topics, saw massive, massive decreases. And so after that update, we had a lot of medical sites that we did reviews for, and in some cases we came back saying we're not sure whether you can recover, and we had some websites that the whole purpose of their website was to talk about alternative treatments and to talk about how traditional medicine has things wrong, and I do think there's a place for that. I think some of the sites that we reviewed were legitimately good information. And perhaps Google is tweaking things so that they are not quite so strict on that type of thing. But it should be noted that the sites that were clients of ours that saw drops with June 3rd, that we thought were related to scientific consensus, and then saw improvements with this January update, were all sites that have been working on improving how they present their medical information. It's too much for me to go into in podcast. We have an entire article we wrote on scientific consensus and what we think Google is trying to measure. And then we also have a white paper that is available. I think we're soon going to make it available for the public to buy, but I can't say that 100% for sure. This white paper talks about different ways that you can maybe separate out your content, things you can add to your content to make it so that users are more likely to trust it, especially if you're talking on topics that are controversial. And so several of our health clients that saw really nice improvements with this most recent update have been actively working on this, potentially removing pages that could be controversial if that makes sense, and doing other things like that. And so we're going to keep an eye on that. Again, we're 2 days into this update, and so I don't want to say 100% that their work on improving the accuracy and trustworthiness of their website is what caused the improvements, but it looks like that at this point. The other thing that's really interesting, and I'm not going to go into great detail in podcast about this because we really need to look into it more, is that some of our sites that are seeing good improvements are lead gen sites. They're sites that they provide information to people, and then when people want to be connected to a lawyer, a doctor, a moving company, a loan provider, things like that, then they get sold as a lead to these companies. And some of these websites have fantastic information, but we really feel that users want extreme clarity. They want to know what's happening with my data, and they don't want it to be hidden in some weird disclaimer that you have to click through 10 pages to find. They really, really want to know this. So it seems to me that a number of the sites that have been working on improving how clear they are in describing their monetization methods, especially if they're doing lead gen work, are seeing improvements. So most of you who are listening to this probably know that with our newsletter, a lot of this information is free and available to everybody. And over the next few weeks, if you're a paid member of the newsletter, and at this point it's very inexpensive, it's $18 a month. If you're a paid member of the newsletter, you'll get more information over the next few weeks on specifically what we're seeing as we dig in more to this type of thing and the types of sites that saw improvements. So we'll have more in newsletter. This week, there's a little bit of stuff in there that I still think it's certainly well worth the $18, worth a lot more than that. But there will be more to come. And then probably in a few weeks from now, we will have a very thorough article with most of that information available for the public as well. We're really refining this process of as we get more and more sites that we can analyze, and more we have more and more impact on the SEO community. It's all becoming a really great thing because we can come up with more conclusions. And so our goal is to do as much as we can to help you to improve your websites, and not to be providing just fluff like, hey, we think it's this, so you should do this, to actually have good data to back things up. Something that I thought was really, really interesting, though, is that we don't have very many clients, if any, that saw dramatic drops with the January update. And usually when there's a significant core update, we see, oh, great, we have a bunch of clients that are up and we have other clients that are down. And that's not necessarily because we were wrong in our recommendations. A lot of the time, people get an audit from us and for whatever reason, they don't implement changes, or, they're working on a bunch of things, or maybe they're not convinced that this needs to change, or maybe some of the things we want to change is going to be very costly or just take a long time. And so it's usually common in an update for us to see, oh, yeah, some of our clients that are struggling with quality issues saw further hits. And I can think of one right now, but not that many. So I don't really know what to think about that, but that's going to be something that's in the back of my mind as I'm analyzing this onwards. So if you were affected by this update, my early advice is read the Quality Raters Guidelines, especially the parts that talk about trust. And I've said this many times, although it's been a few weeks since I've mentioned it. You can do a Control F in the Quality Raters Guidelines and search for your common keywords in your niche. So, for example, if you run a recipe site, do a Control F and search for recipe, and you'll see examples in the QRG of specific things that Google says, look, this recipe site does this well, and this is a sign of high quality, and this recipe site does this poorly, and this is a sign of low quality. And so you can find specific information for your niche in the QRG. And then also we've written tons of information over the years on what we feel Google is doing and changing in their algorithms. A good place to start is to go to mariehaynes.com/EAT, no hyphens, just the word eat. And that will sort of give you a jumping place to start with, to look at, the basics of EAT. And then another place to look at is mariehaynes.com/trust. And this is, we wrote this in conjunction with the September, I believe it was 2018 update. I could be wrong, though. But a number of things that we felt were outlined in the Quality Raters Guidelines that Google could be measuring as a sign of trust. So that's a good place to go to there. Let's see. Moving on, a very important announcement from Chrome that they are soon going to start blocking website push notifications by default. So Firefox already did this last year, and it's something that has not been a part of Chrome. Let's see. Google announced at CES that Google Chrome 80 will block website push notifications. The latest version of the web browser will allow users to opt in to push blocking, with some websites being automatically enrolled in the new blocking feature, preventing visitors from seeing notifications. So that's really interesting. And I think part of this is it's so confusing with, especially in Europe, all the GDPR notifications that come up when you go to a website. And so people just automatically click on, yeah, fine, I'll allow your cookies. And sometimes people don't realize that they're actually opting into browser push notifications. And those can be really annoying. I think very few people actually want those for the majority of websites. And this can be big news for a number of things. So I think that affects a lot of you. I don't really have any specific recommendations right now, but I think many of you want to know this information for sure. Google's made some improvements to the rich results test. So the rich results tester is a tool that you can use. You can put a page page of your website into the tool, and Google will tell you whether the page is eligible for rich results. Rich results, an example would be if you have review stars and you've marked this up with schema and you want your site to appear in the search results with stars next to it. Now, not everybody who marks up with rich results is actually going to see them in the search results. And if you notice, often if you're doing a search for a particular product, let's say I'm trying to buy a particular product and I search for that product reviews, and maybe the first 3 or 4 results will see, oh, this one's 5-star, this one's 4-star. And then the rest of the results, Google doesn't tend to show the review stars all of the time. So sometimes that can mean that you've implemented things improperly, and the rich results tester can tell you that. And sometimes it can mean that Google does not feel that your website is high quality enough. If you lost all of your rich results in conjunction with a core update, then that can be a sign that you've been affected negatively by this update and that Google feels that your website is not particularly high quality. So this is something that we really, really want to pay attention to. The new thing in the rich results tester is that it can tell you whether certain parts of the pages that are embedded, like external resources that you've embedded in the page, whether that is stopping Google from displaying rich results for your website or for that particular page. There are some new features in Google Travel that Glenn Gabe tweeted about this, and he said, new year, new features for Google Travel. New tab with, quote, where to stay. I think he says where to stay. He says where to say. I think he means stay. When to visit and what you'll pay. Google's travel site now shows you the best time to travel somewhere based on weather, crowds, and prices. If you run a travel blog, I would be worried about this. I still think if you have a blog specific to one area, if I had a travel blog all about traveling to Ottawa and all the really cool things you could see in here, in this city, because this is a pretty awesome city, I would really be focusing on things that I can provide that Google can't just grab and give somebody the answer in the search results. So if I have a whole page on what's the average temperature in Ottawa in February, which is actually probably not the best time to come to Ottawa unless you're into winter stuff because the canal's open and it's awesome for skating. But if I had an entire page on that, very easily Google could just make that an answer box or a featured snippet, and nobody has to click through to my site. But I would rather be focusing on content that is way too full of value to be just included in a brief featured snippet or answer box by Google. So that's something to definitely take note of if you are a travel site, for sure. Let's talk about manual actions. This has been our thing for many, many years. Most of you who know me know that it was one of the very first things I did in SEO was I just tried for fun to help somebody get a manual action off of their website. And I was successful and had been successful with a few websites. So I wrote a little book on what steps I take to remove manual actions. We're actually in the process of updating this book. It should be out very soon. So if you have a manual action, that's something that you might be interested in. We have seen more requests for help with manual actions lately. There was an interesting article written by Ivan Garcia talking about how many Spanish websites have been given unnatural links penalties recently. And so this is something that Google is still doing. I think for a year or two, they really, really reduced the number of manual actions they sent out. One thing I can say is that most of the sites that we're dealing with right now, they have a whole bunch of different types of links that Google would consider unnatural. But one of the things that we're noticing a number of these sites have is they've been a part of a reciprocal linking scheme. For example, we have one client now who has relationships with hundreds of different businesses, and it's basically like a guest posting ring that you post on my site and I'll post on one of your sites, and then we'll just all link to each other. And even though they're fantastic articles that are being posted, the scale of this is massive, and so we've actually just filed for reconsideration for this site, and we'll let you know whether Google actually removes the manual action. We haven't actually seen any reciprocal links given as examples by Google. That said, though, we're still waiting for a lot of our reconsideration requests to come back. I mentioned this last week, but we used to say it can take up to 6 weeks to hear back from Google, and we're having some cases that are going on 2 and even 3 months now, which is really, really challenging. So one thing I would recommend if you're filing for reconsideration is to try to be as thorough as you can in your first request. There's generally no harm other than time spent in filing multiple requests. If you want to go, okay, well, let's see if we remove these links, let's see if that actually works, and then we'll remove a few more, and then we can remove a few more. But if it takes 3 months every time, it's going to be years before you get this manual action lifted. So I would say be as thorough as possible if you are trying to get a manual action removed. Google made some announcements this week that they're going to make some changes to desktop results so that they look more like mobile. They're talking about adding the favicons back into desktop search, and Google actually linked to some documentation they have on how to create a favicon. Favicon, for those who don't know, is the little, it's usually a square, but that appears in your Chrome tabs as you have Chrome open. It's hilarious. I'm pointing at mine now, which none of you can see. I think I talk a lot with my hands. So if you don't have a favicon for your website, then I would recommend creating one. There's really no reason not to do that, and then people will start seeing it in the search results. I wanted to talk, in newsletter, we have a bunch of tips, SEO tips that I'm not going to talk about all of them in podcast. Otherwise, we'll be nearing 2 hours for our podcast, which is way too long. I'll run out of voice power if that happens. But I did want to speak about this one where Kevin Indig tweeted, if you make bold claims in your headline, readers will skim your article to test if it can keep the promise with a high bar. If it can't, they'll bounce. If your headline is boring, readers won't read it because it doesn't create an expectation. Go for number 1 and keep the promise. Now, this made me think of something else, and I'm not going to go into massive detail on this because I think this is a part of our paid newsletter, but it was worth me mentioning that I think it's certainly possible that Google uses language processing to look at our title tags and to look at even our H tags on our page. And we started thinking about this when we were talking about how could Google measure whether sites are in line with scientific consensus. Because if Google can see, the title tag of this page says 10 essential oils to help you sleep better. They look at that and they can say, very clearly this website is promoting essential oils to help you sleep. And when they look at the authoritative health websites that they trust, if that information is not corroborated on those websites, then you might be seen as contradicting scientific consensus. And I think it's way more detailed than that, and I don't pretend to understand exactly how the algorithms work in this way, but I think it's something we should really pay attention to. So we've got a little bit more on that and my thoughts on how Google could be using this and how we can actually improve our websites in newsletter, again, episode 115, if you want to read more about that. I feel like this is something I'll eventually write an article on, but we want to test it on a few client sites first, so that will probably come down the road. Let's talk about this interesting Disavow case study. Been seeing a lot of stuff lately from Rise at 7. It's a newer SEO agency that seems to be snapping up some really good talent. And congrats, you guys. I think you're doing good things. Stephen Kenwright wrote an article about a Disavow experiment, and I'm really happy that he published it because the results are not terribly conclusive, but they actually can teach us a number of things. And so in this experiment. What they did was they had two different websites that were came to them as clients, and neither of these websites had a manual action on them. Neither of them had been obviously affected by Penguin in the past, which is one of the main algorithms that deals with links at Google, and yet they both had a fair number of links that Google probably would consider unnatural. And so in the article, Stephen goes through the process that they used to determine what to disavow. And it was an interesting process because I'm not a fan of using link auditing tools to tell you which links to disavow. I think a lot of them can be really good at organizing your links and helping you find them. But we really recommend that you manually go through your links and decide, is this one that breaks Google's guidelines? Could this be seen as part of a link scheme? And so when we do a link audit, it takes us, depending on the site's size, it can take us several weeks to actually go through all of a site's links and then determine what the patterns are and this and that. And so Stephen actually, did a relatively quick link audit. So I think they weren't going through every single link pointing to the website. The other interesting thing is they looked at just links from Search Console. Now, this has been controversial. When we do link audits, should we be looking at just Search Console? Because Google, John Mueller has said this a few times, that Search Console will help you to find the patterns. And I think in one case, he actually said it should be all you need. And so, we debated, well, should we be spending all this time going through links from Ahrefs, Majestic, Moz, sometimes Bing, other sources as well? And we still do. And so I think, I can't remember the number now, but I believe it was Search Console for one of these sites had only 28% of the links that Ahrefs was reporting. And so this disavow case study was done just on the Search Console links, though. So they disavowed a bunch of links. And one site saw a slight improvement, one site saw a bit of a decline, and neither of them seemed to have something where we could go, oh, wow, the disavow was awesome and it was worth the money spent or the time spent. And so what do we conclude from that? So I've written these out in great detail because I feel like me saying this is probably going to confuse a lot of people, but I also think there's a lot of people that are interested in my thoughts here, so hopefully I can explain this properly. One possibility for the sites not to see an improvement after disavowing is that it's possible that not enough of the unnatural links were disavowed. If you think about it, we've been saying this since February. It's almost a year ago now. I was in New York City at a help hangout with John Mueller, and John confirmed to us that there are link algorithms outside of Penguin that essentially look at your website's links and say, well, there's a pattern here of links that seem to be helping with rankings, but we feel like they're made for SEO purposes, but our Penguin algorithm can't just devalue them. And we're not really 100% sure, so let's just put less trust in all of the site's links. And in cases like that, there is a suppression. I'm positive about this. And so if you file a disavow that deals with that type of link, then you can see nice improvements. Not always. And what the disavow would do is make it so that Google says, oh, wait a second, now we're seeing that the links that are pointing to this website that we want to count because they're not disavowed, they tend to be links that we trust. There's no distrust here. And so they can remove that. I feel like it's a filter or some type of a suppression. And so it's possible that there's a threshold that has to be met. And I'm not going to say numbers, but let's say the algorithms go like X% of these links are ones that are on the borderline in terms of whether we can trust them. And so maybe in them disavowing just the links they found in Search Console, using the methods that they describe in their article, it's possible that they didn't do enough to get above that threshold of having good natural links. It's also possible that they didn't have that kind of link. And this is where it gets confusing. The Penguin algorithm, in my opinion, is meant to allow Google to just pay no attention to ultra spammy links. So if you have links from really spammy directory sites, links from article sites like eZine articles, or websites that Google just knows you're never going to get a good valid recommendation from this website that's going to propel your rankings, then Penguin can ignore those. And so if you're disavowing those types of links, and we still do disavow those, there's no harm in doing it because there's no way to know whether they're actually affecting you or not. If you disavow those, you could be just asking Google to ignore links that Penguin's already ignoring. And so it makes sense that we're not going to see much change here in terms of rankings. And so, there's a few possibilities. I've gone into even more detail in newsletter, although I do believe this is an article for just paid subscribers. So should we all be disavowing? I don't think so. And I think, if you have a history of ultra spammy links, there's no harm in going in there and disavowing. The other thing, though, that's interesting is that neither of these sites had any obvious history of being affected by link-related updates. So if you're looking at your Google Analytics traffic and you see a drop, the latest update that we think was link-related was November 8th of 2018 or 19. Gosh, the years are going to get all confused in my head. And then there were other ones. If you go to mariehaynes.com/algo, ALGO, you'll get a list of all the updates that we think are link-related updates. If you're seeing a drop in Google organic traffic that lines up with one of those dates, then yes, I would say that you should be considering doing a disavow. And certainly if you have a massive scale, a history of years of buying links, trading content for links, doing things that you would not be happy with the web spam team looking at, then I think you should definitely consider filing a disavow. I would really encourage you to do a link-by-link audit, though, and not rely on a tool to tell you which links to disavow. Speaking of links, let's talk on the other side. Let's talk about link building. This is a little bit of a controversial topic, but some of you may have heard this story about Gwenyth Paltrow, and she has a new candle. And the candle smells like her lady parts. We'll just leave it at that. I have no idea. We'll just leave it at that. Let's just say it's a topic that got a lot of people talking. And so I just checked this morning, and this page, it's apparently the product is out of stock. Nobody knows if it's actually legitimately a real product. But it got a lot of people talking. And last I checked, it had, I want to say it's like 1,600 links, many from very authoritative websites. And if you look at the data for what keywords it's ranking for, it went from, very, very little, the website to like it's really propelled their rankings. Now, some of this could be user engagement. I mean, a lot of people have been engaging with the website and perhaps this won't stick. But it's a great tip for link building, not to start building weird products that smell like body parts, but instead to think like, what is it that could get people talking? I think one of my first episodes of newsletter, we talked about a company that said they were selling ripped jeans, but essentially like there was almost no jean. It was just all an outline of jeans and just spaces basically. And it was so ludicrous that people were talking about it all over the place. So if you're in charge of link building for your company, start thinking of crazy things that you can do. I'm sure there are legal ramifications, and some of you will not be allowed to produce fake products, but it is something that can get links and can get good attention to your website sometimes. Somebody asked John Mueller on Twitter whether no indexing your tag and search pages would affect your rankings. So let's talk about this. If you have a WordPress site and you've been using tag pages, you might find, like sometimes we do site reviews and people have been tagging pretty much every keyword in their posts for decades, it seems. And then we end up with hundreds or thousands of tag pages that nobody ever lands on in search. And so we always recommend that you no index those. This is controversial though, because those tag pages actually add internal links. And if you no index pages with internal links, that could potentially cause harm. So the question was, can no indexing tag or search pages on a website improve or affect the ranking of the main content pages on that website? Is this a good thing to do? So here's John's answer. I think that would be pretty rare. though ultimately it's up to you to decide how and with which content you want your site represented in search. Probably those tag and search pages aren't primarily what you want to rank for. To me, that's John saying, look, you probably don't need to have those in the index. I think really, unless those pages are getting linked to from external sources, in most cases, it doesn't make sense to have your tag, even your category pages indexed unless they're awesome tag and category pages. And that's an option. We talk about no indexing these pages, but let's say you have tag pages that are actually ranking for some things. Now this can be tricky depending on your WordPress theme, but in a lot of cases, you can modify these tag pages so they actually contain amazing content. So instead of saying like, here's all the blog posts we have on the Penguin algorithm or something like that, we can say, our tag page for Penguin, I'm making this up, by the way, I don't even know if we have our tag pages indexed. Our tag pages for Penguin are tending to rank well, so let's fill them out with enough content so that it actually is useful to people other than just a list of here's our blog posts. So ideally, you do not want to have the majority of your indexed pages made up of this type of page that nobody would ever want to land on for search. Let's see here. This was also an interesting thing, came from a help hangout. I should say we have a couple of new staff that started this week, and when you start off as a new staff member here at MHC, one of your first jobs is to transcribe Google Help Hangouts so that I can look at them and then pull out the meat to share with the rest of you. And so we've fallen behind on some Help Hangout work because we're just so busy with client work. But the fact that we have new staff in here, busy transcribing means I'm going to have more specific stuff from Help Hangouts. Until then, I want to really thank Glenn Gabe for staying on top of these and tweeting, because we follow everything that you tweet, Glenn, and you're a very, very valuable part of this industry, so thank you. Let's see. So Glenn tweeted about, I think what I'll do is I'll read John's response here. It was talking about link building via comments, and I mean, this is not something that we would recommend doing at all. And I think what happened was somebody left a comment on an article, and then they submitted their, the form says to submit a link whenever you fill out a comment, and then this appeared as a site-wide link because it was one of the featured comments for this website, and so the question is whether it should be disavowed because it's now coming from thousands of pages from this website. So John answers that if the comment was a legitimate comment and these kinds of comments have been left all across the web and you're interacting with the web, well, that's just a comment placed on a website and nothing more. But it's a slippery slope because often people decide that they should just go and comment on like 100,000 sites and get 100,000 links from it. So here's what John said, quote, "At that point, our algorithms will probably say, well, all of the links that are links that the person placed themselves, so maybe we should just ignore those links." He goes on to say that a lot of these links within comments are no followed, or they could have the rel user-generated content tag, which shouldn't be taken into account when it comes to ranking, although you'll still see them in Search Console. And then he says, quote, "Just because suddenly you see a lot of links from one website doesn't necessarily mean that there's anything bad that's happening out there or that you need to disavow that website. If those are natural links, those are natural links. There's nothing to disavow about that." And I see this a lot. I see people, I think I wrote an article for Search Engine Watch in like 2014 or something like that about whether site-wide links are inherently unnatural. And it all comes down to how that initial link got created. So if you legitimately were leaving a comment on a website and it resulted in you getting 10,000 followed links from that one particular website, it's probably no different than just having one link from that website. And so let's say you were doing it for link building and you used your keyword as your name. I see this all the time, that people leave comments on our website and their name is cheap NFL jerseys or something like that, or best casinos in Vegas, or something silly like that. If you're doing that and you've done it once or on a couple of websites, it's probably not going to cause a problem. But if you're doing that on, hundreds, thousands of websites, the scale of your link building tactic is what could tip Google off. And I know there's black hats out there going, well, how would they know? And there's other black hats out there saying, well, I get away with this all the time. And I think it's just like speeding in your car. Some people are going to get away with it. And if you get caught, you get a ticket. And so we would not recommend doing this as a tactic. But if you've left a comment on a website and it's resulted in a whole bunch of links pointing to your website, that's not the type of link generally that you need to disavow. Somebody else also asked if they need to disavow links from websites that don't send them any traffic. Now, I'm wondering if I could be partly responsible for this question, because sometimes what we say when we're trying to determine whether to disavow a link is we'll say, look, this link has never sent you any traffic. Maybe it's not a good one. It's not that we say, we look at traffic numbers to determine whether a link is unnatural. It's more, let's say you have a link in an article from the Wall Street Journal, and they've linked to your website on one of the topics that you write on. Well, people are generally going to click on that link, which means it's probably a legitimate link, like it was a legitimate recommendation. If you have a link from a no-name blog that links to your website, and nobody ever visits that blog and nobody ever clicks on that link, it's probably not going to help you that much. That doesn't mean you need to disavow it. But if you have a link from 8,000 no-name blogs, in a way that just doesn't seem to happen in real life, and starts looking like you've been doing this in order to build links for your website, then that's the type of link that you want to disavow. And that's the type of thing that we really feel Google is still paying attention to, and disavow work can help with. A few more things to get through here. Pinterest Trends is now available in the US. Kevin Indig tweeted about this. And I think that's a really great thing to look into. I haven't played around with using Pinterest Trends, but it sounds like Google Trends, basically seeing like what is trending in terms of people searching on Pinterest. If you're writing content and you're trying to find emerging topics to write about, it might be worthwhile playing around with this, not necessarily because you're going to use Pinterest, but if all of a sudden there's a spike in people searching for a particular type of craft or something, then, and I realize I've just pigeonholed Pinterest as a craft website. I know there's way more you can do on Pinterest, but let's say people are searching for this particular type of craft, and you're a website that sells craft supplies, then you should be writing content on that. So, if you're in charge of creating content, this is a good thing to pay attention to. Let's talk a couple of local search changes. I'm just going to say these briefly, but Google Maps has changed their linguistics a little bit for where a business is located. Underneath the business name, where now it says located, it might say your business is located in between other businesses. There was an example by Colin Nielsen from Sterling Sky where he tweeted this, it's Newcastle Massage Therapy Center, and then Google Maps actually says, or actually I think it's the Knowledge Panel, says in between Walsh's Snug and the old Newcastle House Taps and Grills. Now, I felt like this was important to mention, but I'm not sure what changes with this, other than it may be that I really feel like Google's trying to move away from proximity as a ranking factor. Maybe I'm looking too much into this. I think it's also possible that Google's just trying to make Google Maps easier to use. Because often if you're trying to find a pin on Google Maps, whenever I'm at a conference in a city I don't know, and I'm using Google Maps and it's like, it's 123 Main Street, but the businesses don't have numbers on them, and I find it difficult. So if Google Maps said, it's between this big business and this big business, that helps me. Maybe it's just as simple as that. The other thing that's really interesting, though, with Google My Business is that Google's now showing positive sentiment in reviews. And so Brandon Schmidt tweeted about this, where he saw reviews for a website, and underneath, so it was a 4-star review, and underneath it said positive in bolded letters, responsiveness. And the next one said positive, punctuality, quality, responsiveness, value. And it seems that Google is pulling these words out of the review that person left. Now, I think this is significant because we've talked before about how Google has patents to measure the sentiment of reviews online, and if Google can measure it, they can probably use it. And so in this example, there were no negative reviews that were featured, although, I mean, it's certainly possible they are doing that in some cases. But if Google can see that the majority of the reviews that your business is getting are negative in terms of sentiment, and maybe your competitors don't have that same degree of negativity, it might be that you have trouble ranking. I believe this is a component of EAT where it feeds into trustworthiness that Google is reluctant to rank businesses that have reputation issues. So if you are doing local SEO and monitoring reviews for your client, and you start noticing, that, hey, your competitors are having positive sentiment appear, but we're not, you can sometimes shape how your customers leave reviews. Now, I'm not going to tell a customer, like, I need you to say exactly these words, but let's say you run a hotel and you know that, like, one of the best things about your hotel is how comfortable the beds are. Then you can ask people, you can say, hey, can you review us on Google or on Yelp or wherever? But in this case, we're talking about Google. Could you maybe tell us whether you enjoyed the comfort of our beds, or like, here's some other ideas of things you could write about. There are ways you can do that. And so you really, really want to make it so that Google is determining more positive sentiment in your reviews than negative. And then the counter side to that is, if there is a lot of negativity in these reviews, then the business may have some issues to deal with. And as an SEO, that's not really our responsibility to make businesses have better customer service. But it's something that you can tell them that this can impact your ability to rank in Google, and so this is a problem that probably needs to be fixed. All right, this was a lot of stuff in podcast. I want to end with a Q&A. You can ask me a question via our newsletter. Pretty much every episode has near the top a link to a form you can fill out to ask a question about your website. And as much as we can, we try to answer these on podcast because then that can help other people. So it's kind of a long question here. We are a successful parenting site. In the past, we did unnatural link building with mommy blogs. We disavowed those that we know we paid for. Nevertheless, hundreds of mommy blogs link to us naturally and continue to do so. And our hundreds of natural links look like the unnatural links that we disavowed. So there's more to this question, but let me just stop right here. This happens a lot, and I don't have an exact answer for you, but I'll tell you what we've done in the past. A few years ago, I removed a penalty for a very well-known e-commerce brand, and their brand name was also their main keyword. And we had, they had paid for blog posts. It wasn't quite mommy blogs, but same sort of thing. Personal bloggers who were writing about their product and saying, like, wow, this was the best widget that we've ever used, and linking back to them with a keyword. And so that actually got them a manual action. And we were really, really struggling to remove this manual action. And then we got a response back from Google that gave us example links, and one of them was one of these posts. And we had not removed that link because the business owner felt like that mention was actually a truly natural mention. So we actually reached out to that site owner who had linked to this client and said, could you tell us honestly, like, did somebody pay you for this? Were you incentivized in any way? And she said, no, we just love their products. They're fantastic. And so we wanted to recommend them. So this caused a conundrum for us because when we're removing penalties, we really strive to not do harm to the site that we're working with. And that type of link where a customer says, I love your product so much that I want to blog about it, like, that's the kind of link we should all be striving for. But the problem was this company had built hundreds of links like this that were not natural. So what we did in that case was I gave my client the choice. And my recommendation actually at that time was to tell Google in our reconsideration request, look, we've reached out to a bunch of these site owners, and we actually provided Google with screenshots of their responses saying, like, no, we legitimately like this website and we wanted to link to them naturally, and not disavow those links. Now, had we done that, I think we still would have gotten the manual action lifted. However, the client said, look, we'd rather take a temporary dip in traffic and just start from scratch. And so anything that looked even remotely like it could have been made for SEO purposes, we went ahead and got them removed or disavowed them. And this site was one of my best success stories in terms of once the manual action was removed, they saw a jump up of something like 50% in traffic. And then after that, this is in the days where Penguin was still more of a penalizing algorithm. When Penguin reran, they saw this massive jump up of something like 200% in traffic. And it was at a time where very few people were seeing improvements from Penguin. And so this actually worked for us in that case to be extremely, extremely aggressive. Now, in your case, I'm reluctant to say, get in there and disavow all those. I think we'd have to analyze it to say that for certain. But if they're keyword anchored and you can't tell whether they're natural mentions, and you've done that as a link building tactic in the past, I would err on the side of actually disavowing those. I know I'm making a lot of people cringe when I say that, because if you're a link builder, it would be very painful to disavow that type of link if they were earned naturally. I want to continue reading this question because there's more in here that can actually help people. Let's see. The site goes on to say, but we have had EAT problems, particularly the February 2017 update. I've talked about this a lot, but February 7th, 2017 was when we really feel like Google made it a huge part of their algorithms to actually measure EAT, and expertise became an important thing there. And so the other important thing, though, that this site owner is saying is that the vast majority of links, especially in the last 4 or 5 years, are completely natural. And so that can be a factor too, right? I do believe that Google looks at, because John Mueller said this before, that if you got a manual action, you can look at your most recent links in Search Console and see what just recently happened that maybe tripped the scales in order for Google to think that this was an unnatural linking pattern. So, I would not be rushing to disavow any of your recent links. I think some of those older links that look very much like ones you used to have that you used to pay for, I would probably disavow those. Again, with all sorts of disclaimers because we haven't looked at the site. But when it comes to disavowing, if you've been heavily involved in unnatural link building in the past, then yes, I would be more erring on the side of being aggressive than being cautious. So I think we'll end it there. This is another very long podcast episode. As I mentioned last week, we're going to be moving soon. We've outgrown our office. This is such a funny story. We have to decide whether we want our new office. So we're currently in office number 300. We were in 404 first, and the joke was nobody could ever find us. And we're in 300. We're going to move next door to, you guessed it, 301. And they want us to say whether we want to just keep 300 and move the nameplates on the doors, or move to 301. And I'm tempted to just move to 301 for the SEO joke implications. So that's probably going to be happening. I think we're moving in just a few weeks. So that's an exciting time for us. If you are a newsletter reader, again, mariehaynes.com/newsletter. This is episode number 115. There's other things in newsletter that I didn't talk about in podcast. Tips for finding some internal link opportunities, how to tell if you're being filtered by a safe search. This is an article that Glenn Gabe wrote. There's a bug in Google Analytics demographics data, and recommended reading. There's some really good recommended reading this time. One thing that I haven't watched yet, although I know some of my team has, is Brittany Muller from Moz put out a video on an intro to Python, and that's something I really, really would love to get some of our team into, is utilizing more programmatic ways to look at the data that we currently look at. We do so much manually, which I think is a strength for us, but I think we could be doing things better as well. And I wanted to end on a really positive note. I saw I want to say it was Christy Hulse, but my apologies if this was somebody else. Somebody tweeted a little while back about giving compliments to women. I know this seems like a very random thing for me to end with, and the thing was, women tend to like hearing things not like hey, you look great today, or you don't look so tired today, or something like that. Somebody, I'm sorry if I say the name wrong, Rajiv, on Twitter this morning, some people were talking about their favorite podcast episodes, and Rajiv said that they recommend my podcast because I come across as having confidence. That is one of the nicest things you can say to somebody. That really, really improved my day. It fascinates me again that people love to listen to me talk about this thing. I love to talk about Google and what Google's doing. And just hearing that I'm projecting confidence was a wonderful compliment. And I really, really thank you for that. And I would like to challenge all of you who made it to the end of this podcast to give somebody a compliment like that today. Don't compliment their appearance or, that you like their clothes or something like that, but something in their personality that just shines. If you can compliment people on that type of thing, it really, really helps improve people's days. So thank you for that. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be updating you on what's happening with this Google update, and I wish you the best of luck with your rankings.